The last part of this chapter is on smooth muscle. And remember, smooth muscle is located in the walls of most hollow organs. It's in the respiratory tract, digestive tract, urinary tract, some of the reproductive system, like the uterus. It's also in the circulatory system, except in the small blood vessels called capillaries, as well as the heart. So most of these organs are going to contain two layers of sheets with fibers oriented at right angles to each other. There's an inner layer, which is called the circular layer, and an outer layer, which is called the longitudinal layer. The circular layer is going to allow the organ to constrict, and the longitudinal layer is going to allow the organ to shorten. So when both of these layers work in unison, like in the small intestine, there is something that occurs which is called peristalsis. So peristalsis means that it is the alternating contraction and relaxation of these muscles, so of the smooth muscle layers. And what it does, especially in places like the small intestine, is it allows mixing and squeezing of substances that are located in these hollow organs. And you'll learn much more about that next semester in A&P2. But for now, you should know what peristalsis is. And it happens because of the interplay of both the circular layer and the longitudinal layer. So we're going to look at some other differences between smooth muscle and skeletal muscle. And one of those differences is in what's called the varicosity, which are bulbous swellings of nerve fibers instead of the neuromuscular junction. So remember, you learned in skeletal muscle that there is this axon terminal that's kind of bulb shaped at the end. So this part is the axon terminal. There is then a neuromuscular junction. So this is our axon. We have the synaptic vesicles, which contain neurotransmitters, the motor end plate, where remember there are receptors for acetylcholine, and the continuation of the motor end plate membrane is that sarcolemma. So this is what we have in skeletal muscle. However, in smooth muscle, we have varicosities in place of the neuromuscular junction. The varicosities, like the neuromuscular junction, store and release neurotransmitters into a synaptic cleft, which is referred to as a diffuse junction. And it's innervated by the autonomic nervous system. So, and that's very important because remember that the smooth muscle is involuntarily controlled, just like cardiac muscle is. So, for your upcoming exam, you're going to need to know the differences between the three different types of muscles. Another unique situation within smooth muscle is that they have a less elaborate sarcoplasmic reticulum and no T tubules. So, since SR, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, is less developed, the sarcoplasmic reticulum then it does store intracellular calcium, but most calcium comes from extracellular fluid origins, basically from the ECF. So you can see this is the extracellular fluid here, and we would have some calcium in it as well. This also happens in cardiac muscle. So instead of, so the sarcolemma is going to contain pouch-like infoldings called caveoli The caveoli are basically instead of T tubules. So you need to be able to compare and contrast smooth muscle with skeletal muscle. The caveoli are kind of like caves. They contain numerous calcium channels that open in response to rapid influx of extracellular fluid calcium. So the calcium enters the calcium channels, which have the infolium called caveoli. Calcium entry triggers calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum then as well. So it still comes from the SR, but in addition, it also comes from the extracellular fluid. Another difference is that smooth muscle fibers are usually electrically connected via gap junctions, whereas we know that skeletal muscle fibers are electrically isolated with motor units. The gap junctions are specialized cells that allow these action potentials basically to spread quickly from cell to cell. So we see the gap junctions on this image. And remember, gap junctions you learned about earlier on in the semester. We see the caveoli. So remember that smooth muscle has no striations, no sarcomeres, but it does contain overlapping thick and thin filaments. So smooth muscle also differs from skeletal muscles in that the thick filaments are fewer, that's the myosin, and it has myosin heads along the entire length. So, and there's also no troponin complex, and it does not contain tropomyosin. So instead of troponin, we have what's called calmodulin, of which calcium binds to.